This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Godward, The Prodigal Steps. From a young age, Larry McClure's life was rife with tragedy, following the deaths of his cousins, neighbor, father, and twin brother. This series of unfortunate events set him on a course to find answers as to why his life was filled with so much pain. Godward, The Prodigal Steps, compiles the answers Mr. McClure found to this burning question over a 40-year period. Larry McClure is just an ordinary man with an extraordinary God. Having been born in poverty, he had the pleasure of sharing the company of others from all walks of life, be it rich or poor, black or white, young or old, male or female. And he found through many conversations that each of us wants the same thing, to know the truth. Many go their whole life never having found the answer. Through his research, Mr. McClure strives to help others to find answers and free them of their burdens. For it is only the truth that sets us free. Happy to have Larry McClure join me now here on Speaking of Writers. Larry, welcome to this program.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you letting me be on your show.
So this book I was reading was never going to be published. What happened?
Well, it started, of course, when I was very young. You mentioned all the deaths in my family. When that all started about when I was 8 years old, and it continued for quite a few years. I lost all those people before I was 13 years old. So it really set me on the path to kind of find out what was going on. I like most people, I see, are asking, will I see these people again? Do they go to heaven? Do they go to hell? I have a lot of questions, and I spend a lot of time in church, trying to find these answers. But the more I searched, the less information I could find. So I got kind of discouraged with the church, and I went out on my own to start finding answers. And once I did that, the information that I found was just unbelievable, and it just became an obsession for me to find more answers to what was going on in for everything in the world, the universe, God. And I had all those questions, just pretty much like everybody else. And my research took me over 40 years, but I finally found what I was looking for. And I really just did it for myself. It wasn't really meant to be for anybody else. But as I finally winded down and I found the answers that I was looking for, I found out that I had stage 4 cancer and only had about 6 months to live. So I had written all these pages, probably thousands of pages, and spent all this time studying. And the doctor told me with treatment, I could probably may live 2 years. So something just moved me to take this information and get it in book form and publish it. I guess I was just looking for something to leave behind to my family and kids, and my legacy, that I'd leave some kind of trace on this earth. And so I finally got the book together. I kind of rushed it because I didn't think I had a whole lot of time to live, and got it published. And now it's been 6 years since I was first diagnosed. So that's one reason I'm here able to talk to you. And I'm in the middle of my second book. I've got about 70 pages written in it. So if I live long enough, I'll just keep writing.
You had so much tragedy even before the age of 13, right?
Yes, it was. We weren't necessarily in poverty, but we were lower middle class, and of course, my father and brother was about a 2-3 year period there where they were dying of cancer, and so I spent a lot of time with other relatives, and I spent time with my cousins, and though they were killed a year after my twin brother died. So most of my life was spent, I thought, the funeral home we went to were our relatives. We spent so much time there. So it was just, it just became kind of part of our life that, we just something we dealt with, our whole family.
Larry, was finally getting that book published cathartic for you?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really, I'm not looking for glory. I'm not looking for fame or, fortune or anything. It really changed my life. I mean, I was angry, I was bitter, especially, I had no parents to speak of. I was pretty much on my own since I was, 10 years old. So, it made me kind of an angry child because, I seen other kids with their parents and families, and, we didn't have that. So, uh, once I got into the spiritual, study, it really just took over my life. It consumed, and I spent a lot of time in the world just like everybody else, and I was kind of back and forth on the shore in the water. But it finally was so powerful that it took me over, and it changed me. I mean, it made me definitely a better person. I mean, the people that know me now, they can't believe the change in my, that knew me when I was younger. And so, I thought, well, if that could change me, I'm probably one of the biggest sinners out there, that then maybe this would give hope to others, and that maybe going through the same kind of thing that I went through, with personal tragedy and things. And once I got into it, the prodigal steps, once I learned what was really going on, I found that, selfishness was what was causing all the problems. And selfishness has pretty much led to just about every civilization to be destroyed. So it was destroying my life, and I seen it was destroying others. So once I found the steps, it really walks you through why selfishness is so devastating, in your life. And then, of course, the other steps take you away from it and back to what I call Godward, or you get back to what I refer to as the birth line in my book.
Let's talk about those steps. What are the 14 prodigal steps?
Well, basically, everybody thinks that they have free will, but they don't. They're not really free will. It's just free choice. So you have the choice to either choose self-will or you can choose God's will. If you choose God's will, then there are steps that you follow that God has, laid out for you. Self-will is pretty much like blind experimentation. You don't really know where you're going. So self-will starts it, and then the second step is from self-will is selfishness, which that's the big sin. And then selfishness leads to separation, sensuality, spiritual destruction, self-abasement, and then starvation, or what I refer to as the pig pen. This is all based on the prodigal son in the Gospel of Luke. These are the steps that he went through when he decided to take his inheritance and go out in the world on his own. And he did, which when he got out there, he squandered all his money, ended up in a foreign country, and the only job he could find was feeding pigs. And so that's kind of the basic way that selfishness and self-will leads you to. It leads you to a dead end, because it's more materialistic. And then the next steps, the prodigal son realized that, he would be better off if he was just back in his father's house, even being a servant. So you have realization, you have resolve, repent, return, reconcile, reclothe, and rejoice. And every self-will thought, every self-will action goes through these steps. And it's not like you follow one step and the next one. They're just all over the place. Some of your thoughts may be in one step, some may be in another step. So, everybody wonders why their life is the way it is, but basically it's because of their selfishness. And the only way to overcome it is to become selfless. And when my study, the book said get enlightenment or be enlightened, but it never told you how to do it. So I was talking to somebody about these, what I was writing, and they said, well, give me some steps. What can I go through? And that's basically what I do, is walk you through the process, and you'll go through it whether you know it or not. But the sooner you know it, the more you can identify it, the quicker that you can make, your life turn around and get away from what I call the pig pen and back to a point where you can make better decisions, which once you get back to the birth line, then you have a choice to choose God's will and go in a totally different direction.
We're chatting with Larry McClure here on Speaking of Writers. His new book, Godward, The Prodigal Steps. It's available Amazon.com, also BarnesandNoble.com. So, Larry, why is selfishness the original sin?
Well, that's what I'm trying to cover in my book. Is almost like two books. It's Godward and then the book, The Prodigal Steps. I wrote The Prodigal Steps first, but to help you understand more about selfishness and where it came from, I wrote the book Godward. So this all goes back way before, mankind. This started in the spirit. So it's all, they refer to it as like the angels rebelling or whatever, but basically it was just the thought forms and other entities choosing to go their way instead of God's way. And that's pretty much the story of Adam and Eve. They wanted to be like God and not one with God. So they chose the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and went in a direction away from God. So once we leave our source of life, then like God told Adam, you're surely going to die. So once you choose these steps away from God, you slowly get away from all the resources that God has given you to stay alive. So you pretty much do. You'll surely die because you're led into the materialism away from spiritualism. So what my book tries to do is to bring you back to that spiritualism and spiritual understanding of, you didn't start out just as a man here on earth. You started out as a spiritual entity. Everybody thinks that, you're a body seeking or having a spiritual experience. Well, you're not. You're a spirit having a physical experience. So, once you identify yourself, you have a better chance of getting back to where you came from.
Let's go back to the pig pen for a moment. Why does everyone go to the pig pen?
Everyone has to meet themselves, and that's how we learn. The earth plane is the application of experience. We're all here to experience ourselves. So if you can't experience yourself, then you will meet yourself and meet that experience. So all of our thoughts, negative, positive, whatever, we project outwards so we can meet them. So a lot of people don't realize that, what's coming at them is really coming from themselves, because we have to meet ourselves to understand ourselves. Like Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, if you don't know yourself, you live in poverty, and you are that poverty. So, the quicker that you can understand that, like I did, that's the conclusion that I came to, was my worst enemy was me. I was the one that was setting these things in motion, because once you understand the steps, every self-willed thought that I had led me down that path. And that path got me to where I finally got to the end, so I could, step 7 is starvation, and step 8 is realization. You got to come to the point of realizing that, something needs to change, and the extremes are like, those that are drug abuse or, things like that. Of course, there's, everybody goes through it, but, we all, lower ourselves and our self-esteem, because we don't really believe that we're children of God and that we're just, humans, and this is the way humans are. And, everybody goes through this. Well, they do, but, the ones that figure it out and realize that, in my father's house, I got royalty, so I need to get back to where, I belong.
Are there more steps to follow other than the prodigal steps?
Yes, you can think of it as, I call them, in my second book, I refer to them as the Godward steps. So God has, laid out these steps to help you get back to, your home, your original heavenly home. But the prodigal steps is like going sideways or taking the exit and getting off the, main road. And then once you go through those steps, it puts you back on the path again. So once you complete, those steps, then you enter what is called the wilderness period. And this is all, of course, based on, the Bible too, the Israelites going into the wilderness. There's 7 steps in the wilderness. And this is a transition from the material world, or the body and flesh, into the spirit. So you can't just jump into from one to the other. You have to really kind of transcend, because you got to get rid of the selfishness that is inside of you. So you go through 7 steps in the wilderness, and then after that, the next steps will be the promised land steps. So there's 7 more after that, and they just keep going. I don't really know. I mean, I've seen over 100 different steps, that are there that I can find, but I'm sure there's more, out there that I haven't, discovered yet. So the sooner you get, on the track and start these steps, the better off you are.
What happens if I don't get on the track and follow the steps?
Well, what happens is we, we're the main word is to awaken or wake up. And if you don't wake up to the truth, then you just spend most of your time in asleep. And those in sleep is where nightmares occur. So your life is always, in a nightmarish state. But if you continue on that path, you pretty much lower your consciousness or vibration, and you can slowly get to where you can't reincarnate anymore, and it really sets up a obstacle or a stumbling block for you to get Godward. So that's why Jesus said, the time is at hand now. You need to learn it while you can, or while the information is available, because there may come a time where this information is available, or the availability to come into the earth plane, that you can work on these things. So you kind of dissipate yourself and banish yourself from God. And the Bible talks about the outer darkness, and that's pretty much where you go. In the outer darkness, there's gnashing of teeth and a lot of trouble. So that isn't a place that you want to end up.
And Larry, what would you like readers to take away from Godward, the Prodigal Steps?
That things aren't really the way you think they may be. I mean, just what I was taught in church was, there's a lot of truth there, and don't get me wrong. But what I found was there's so much more, and they're not telling you these things. You're not being told them, so you don't recognize them. So, I think that, the more information that you can find, the better. It's like in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, the one that thinks they know everything but doesn't know themselves doesn't know anything. So really, if you don't understand these truths, you don't know anything. You're just blindly, like I say, going through the world and stumbling in the dark.
The book is Godward, The Prodigal Steps. It is available at Amazon.com, also BarnesandNoble.com. The author is Larry McClure. Larry, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Speaking of Writers. This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards.